Curiouser and Curiouser: Novelty-centred Business Models and Value Creation in Established Publishing Firms, a paper for the 2013 International Conference of the Book by Anna Faherty of Kingston University, London. Despite many announcements of the death of books or publishing, literary reading is on the rise, as is reading on tablet computers and e-reading devices. Worldwide, the publishing industry is estimated to be worth €80 billion, making it the second largest creative industry after television. Yet, like Lewis Carroll's eponymous heroine at the start of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, the publishing industry now finds itself on the cusp of a world that is fundamentally different from the environment it has previously known. Declining print sales at the start of the economic downturn were described at the time as worse than 9/11. The disruptive influence of the internet and corresponding reader expectations of free or low-cost access to content caused considerable angst in some markets, and publishers even declared war on disruptive bookseller Amazon over e-book pricing. In fact, barely a week passes by without an article in the business or mainstream press predicting the death of the book, the death of publishing, or the death of old-fashioned, inflexible publishing firms. And, in a comment worthy of a guest at the Mad Hatter's Tea Party, author and new media scholar Clay Shirky even declared in 2012 that publishing was no longer a job, but a button. These threats, however, are nothing new. After all, established houses have struggled for decades with declining sales, costly authors, poor supply chains, and a business model that James Lichtenberg christened curious. But the speed and intensity of recent change has taken its toll on the entire publishing ecosystem and even the nature of the publisher's role, with many organizations debating what it now means to occupy the publishing space. Musinelli describes the state of publishing in the 20-teens as a discontinuity. Others have appropriated the weather-beaten analogy of the perfect storm. And in the maelstrom of debate around the future of publishing, the business models of established industry players are accused of being broken or under threat, and the business models of new entrants to the industry are those that draw the most attention. Yet, established publishers must learn from others and create strong, innovative business models if they are to avoid falling down the rabbit hole of ever-decreasing revenues created when physical book sales are replaced by lower-priced e-book transactions. As Eric Ries says, productivity in conditions of extreme uncertainty is not about cranking out more widgets and features, it's about developing a business that creates value and drives growth. Investigating established publishers' business models is a way to monitor how these long-standing organizations are developing their businesses and check whether they are, as the popular press would have it, doomed, or if they are actually creating value and securing their future. The term business model itself has many definitions. This study uses that of Amit and Zott, who describe a business model as the content, structure and governance of transactions defined so as to create value through the exploitation of business opportunities. This definition grew out of a study of e-business firms, defined as companies that generate more than 10% of their revenue from online sales, which realize value not only by reconfiguring their internal processes, but from developing innovative exchange mechanisms and transaction structures. Publishers could also be categorized in this way, since most will derive more than 10% of their revenues from digital sales. However, publishers' ability to create value from business models is a hitherto unresearched area. In terms of publishing, a generic industry business model has not really been defined. Clark and Phillips depict the primary business model of publishing as the sale of copies of books, or in the scholarly sphere, the sale of subscriptions to journals. This is also the inherent assumption in Davies and Bulkwell's representation of the current publishing business model as a profit and loss statement built around book sales. However, Clark and Phillips' secondary business model, the licensing of authors' rights to others, is often the key factor in making a book project profitable. In fact, Bede describes publishing as fundamentally a rights business, while Thompson identifies owning the right to use and exploit intellectual content as the distinctive feature of publishing firms. The Clark and Phillips model is therefore a less than optimal approach to modelling the essence of how publishers create and capture value. Given the collaborative nature of publishing endeavours, their model also omits participants who play key roles within the process. An alternative approach is therefore presented here, which defines the publishing business model as the acquisition of content rights and the exploitation of those rights, delivering value for content creators, publishers, and customers. This model encompasses both the physical production and distribution of books and the sale or license of rights to other parties. As the figure illustrates, even in this relatively straightforward definition, there are many variations and complexities. Although the model omits third parties involved in the physical creation of books, such as freelance designers and editors, typesetters, printers, and software developers, it still highlights the multiple transactions publishers make to source content and reach consumers, as well as the notable disconnect between publishers and their ultimate readers. As a generic model of the transactions that typically take place in publishing businesses, this can, according to Baden, Fuller and Morgan, act as a benchmark for assessing new initiatives and classifying different kinds of behaviour. This benchmarking approach is the methodology used in this study in order to identify novelty-centred innovations in publishing business models. Zott and Amit categorise business model innovations into two approaches. Efficiency-centred innovations deliver products or services similar to the company's current offer, but in more efficient ways. It is these models that gain the most exposure when looking at reported innovation within established publishing firms. However, it is novelty-centred innovations, those which introduce new ways of conducting economic exchanges, that delivered the greatest performance boost to the entrepreneurial firms in Zott and Amit's study. These exchanges are usually overlooked in showcases of exemplary publishing innovation, which instead focus on technology or content developments, the widgets and features Rees derives. The case examples in this study were all sourced from organisations that had been involved in publishing for more than 50 years. An initial scan of company websites, corporate announcements and the trade press led to a long list of potential case examples. These were each explored in order to remove any initiatives that could be considered to be wholly efficiency-centred. This resulted in the loss of some projects that might be viewed purely as marketing activities rather than complete economic transactions, and a number of new initiatives that were focused only on the development of new publishing formats without any changes to the fundamental business model. Cases where there was insufficient information available to draw effective conclusions about the underlying transactions were also weeded out at this stage, as were any exact duplicate business models. The final group of case examples amounted to 9 projects from 9 established publishing firms. Data on each of these initiatives was obtained from a range of sources, including corporate websites, trade publications, scholarly research, and mainstream media coverage. Due to the fast-moving contemporary nature of some of the projects, authoritative industry blogs and online publications were also utilised. These were especially useful as sources of publisher opinion. By visually mapping the business model of each case example onto the generic publishing business model, as demonstrated here with the example of autonomy, key differences between the norm and the case examples were highlighted. These differences were then grouped together to identify common approaches to new value creation across the entire set of cases. The case example analysis identified 4 key categories of novelty-centred business models used within the featured established publishing firms. Category A, developing new distribution mechanisms and sales transactions. Category B, breaking down barriers between publishers and consumers. Category C, capturing new revenue streams. And Category D, transforming to a service business. When mapped onto the generic publishing business model, Category A models show few differences on the left-hand side of the diagram. Publishers still acquire content in a number of different ways, using traditional transactions to deliver value to content creators. However, a number of different approaches are used to create value for the publisher and other business model participants, including transaction mechanisms that harness usage statistics, personalised content experiences, and new customer relationships with software developers. Category B models are all about creating new value through building direct relationships with consumers. This is done through direct sales, but also via the provision of free content. Like Category A models, Category C examples are all about making changes to the right-hand side of the generic business model. In this case, not only is there a new relationship between publisher and consumer, but new revenue streams are captured in order to monetize a free-to-the-end-user service. While Macmillan's side table community could possibly be considered a Category A or B model, this move to find new revenue streams outside the sale of content to consumers or sales intermediaries led to it being assigned a category all of its own. Category D models are the most radical of all those identified. They defy being mapped onto the generic business model and transform the activities of publishers from product development, manufacture and distribution to the delivery of a service. As Chesbrough reports, new technologies will only deliver value to existing organisations if a suitable business model can be found. New entrants to the publishing industry who find more appropriate business models than established firms may therefore realise far more value from the opportunities presented by developments in digital technology. Established publishing companies run the risk of being trapped by the traditional business models unless they make a conscious effort to develop innovative alternatives. The novelty-centred business models used by the featured established publishing firms show that companies are experimenting with more than new technologies and formats. They are also creating value through new transaction mechanisms, new revenue streams, new distribution methods, and new direct relationships with consumers. Some are even utilising their competencies and capabilities to create entirely new service offerings. Despite multitudinous predictions about the future, however, it is unclear which, if any, of these models will prevail. Esposito suggests that publishers will ultimately fragment into either demand-side or supply-side organisations. Demand-side publishers will stick largely to the generic publishing business model, acquiring rights to content for which there is already a market, and then charging customers to read the resulting published works. They may also stray into category A or B business models as they create granular products and explore opportunities to sell direct to consumers. Supply-side publishing is more aligned with the category D case examples. Here the author becomes a client customer. This applies not just to offering self-publishing services, as in the Author Solutions case example, but also to the open access fees charged by academic and scholarly journal publishers. The success of such service ventures will be linked as much to business model redesign as to the creation of the services themselves. As organisations move from transaction-based models to relationship-based ones, managerial and financial resources will be diverted away from book production and new product development, raising questions about how established firms can leverage their advantages within their new service operations. Such radical innovations also require the development of new technological and commercial skills. Ultimately, the case analysis suggests publishers are pursuing two distinct routes to business model innovation. One tinkers with the myriad mechanisms and transactions within the generic publishing business model presented earlier. The other rips that model apart and rebuilds it as a service model, as shown here. The publisher role in this approach is presented in inverted commas to reflect the move away from the traditional publishing function. In conclusion, it is clear that established publishing firms have ventured through the looking glass into a world full of different novelty-centred business models, each of which creates value for the organisation and/or its authors and readers. However, the extent to which these efforts will affect the future success of these companies and the industry as a whole is unclear. More interestingly, perhaps, the study raises the question of how some traditional publishing firms manage to drive innovative new models and create new value, while others may not. Clear answers to this question would have valuable practical implications for the future of the entire publishing industry, for the global economy it fuels, and for the cultural wonderland it underpins.